It makes a huge difference if workers are harassed, forced into captive audience meetings, followed around the workplace while they're doing their job. So the bare minimum is that workers deserve to know who the hell these people are.
Are you on? Which side are you on?
Bob Funk is the executive director of LaborLab. Bob Funk, also haver of a very cool name. Bob, welcome to the program. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me, brothers. Obviously, a big fan of the show, and really glad to come on after the last segment, because I think it's incredibly important. And that last comment is so spot on. I mean, the difference between your employer or most other institutions is that workers can actually rectify a situation. They actually have a voice. Going back to the win-lose analogy, but just because unions lose every once in a while doesn't mean you shouldn't play ball. And unions actually let you onto the field instead of just sitting in the stands.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right, Bob. So really appreciate your time. Like I said, you're executive director of LaborLab. LaborLab has been sponsoring the Valley Labor Report for a while now. And we talk about what LaborLab is and what LaborLab does every time, but just remind folks with a little bit more, a little bit more fidelity about the organization, the mission, and how it got started.
Yeah, absolutely. We started LaborLab kind of in the depths of the pandemic. Obviously, there was a lot of interest and continues to be, and there has always been a lot of interest in unionizing your workplace. Honestly, we originally started simply to educate more workers on their rights, specifically their rights to unionize under the Constitution, federal law, and international law. And the reason we did that is we'd seen enough polling that showed that a striking amount, almost half of Americans think that they don't have the right to be in a union. So we saw that as a huge problem. And so we launched the effort mainly to make the process a little more understandable, make it clear where the lines were for employers, and quickly became the top resource around the right to unionize and how to execute those rights. But at the same time, that we all know the facts. 70% of Americans support unions. Half of Americans want to be in a union, but union density continues to drop, and that's because of unchecked union busting. Everyone's familiar with what's happening at Amazon and Starbucks, but the fact of the matter is that we expose hundreds of companies every year for union busting and trying to suppress the right of workers to collectively bargain. And as you said in your last segment, unions truly are the path. If you care about healthcare, if you care about a stable community, stable families, unions are the pathway, but there's so much employer resistance in the way. And we figured, hey, 70% of Americans think that workers should be allowed to freely organize and think that that's a good idea. It's time to start calling out those employers that are opposed to their workers having a voice in the workplace. So we started leveraging a number of tools that have been underutilized by the labor movement to identify and expose companies in literally every state that are suppressing the voice of workers, keeping them down, keeping their families paycheck to paycheck, so that we could create some public resistance to it. That's why it's so great that the Valley Labor Report is constantly bringing attention and naming and shaming the companies that do this. Additionally, we under federal law, workers and the public are entitled to certain information regarding their employers and how much their employers are spending to suppress organizing efforts. Unfortunately, those tools are very difficult and complicated to access. So we wanted to streamline the process to make sure that when workers are organized, they actually have access to the information that they are entitled to under the law. And the result has been a number of wins for workers simply because information is power. I mean, it's a powerful thing when a worker making $15 an hour finds out that their employer is spending $500 an hour for some consultant to come in and give some PowerPoints and follow workers around the workplace, do ride-alongs, and harass them on the shop floor.
Yes. Yeah, that's really important. And they're supposed to, and a lot of times they do, but they do it late, and I want you to talk to us about that. But they're supposed to file with the Department of Labor when they hire these union busters. Talk to us about that. What does that process look like, and why is it that so often that information comes too little too late? I mean, every single new filing this week, I think it was every single one. Let me look and see. Yeah, filed after tally, filed after tally, filed after tally, fired after tally. Yeah, filed after tally. Yeah, every single one where there was a union election, the union busters did not file until after the election was over. And so what are these regulations, and how do they work? And how are they able to get away with seemingly not abiding by them?
That's a really good question, and that's the question that at LaborLab we're constantly demanding answers for. Just to take a step back, most people in the labor movement are familiar with the National Labor Relations Act, and that is the cornerstone labor law in this country. There was additional legislation that plays an incredibly important role for workers' rights, accountability, et cetera. It's the Labor Management Relations and Disclosure Act. And what most people are familiar with that act is that it created a whole bunch of transparency rules for unions themselves, which honestly, I think anyone that's listening to the show, I think both of you brothers would agree with this, that union transparency is a good thing. We need to make sure that union members know how their dues are being spent. The part of the law that has been intentionally neglected since the law was passed in the 1950s is the fact that it put the same regulations and rules on companies and labor relations consultants, and let's just call them what they are, union busters, put the same rules on them. In fact, Congress was even more specific when it came to the consultant class and the employer class. So that's why it's so striking that for so long, the federal government has neglected its mandate to hold these union busters accountable. So what this looks like is under the law, Congress said when there's a union election, workers are entitled to have a transparent understanding of what their employers are doing, especially what kind of spending they're initiating to bring down the union drive. In fact, it was so important that they said, this isn't an annual filing. You have to do it within 30 days of being hired so that workers, while they're organizing, have a clear idea of who is talking to them, why they're talking to them, and what their biases are. Unfortunately, the Department of Labor, since the law was enacted, has almost solely focused on union compliance while letting the Chamber of Commerce's clients off the hook. And let me give you an example. Right now, unions have an annual financial disclosure that they're supposed to make. Roughly 90% of unions comply with the law. The other 10% is usually a small local. Maybe they have a new secretary treasurer on board. The Department of Labor reaches out to them and says, we don't have your disclosures. And then they enroll in a voluntary compliance program. So at the end of the day, you almost have 100% compliance. Now, let me show you the other side. As you pointed out, Jacob, at the top, almost all of the disclosures that came in this week were late. We did a groundbreaking analysis a couple of years ago and found that compliance on the corporate side with disclosure laws was at 18%, like literally the inverse of how unions comply with the law. So we spent a lot of time, especially during the previous administration, trying to bring attention to this. So much attention to it that they actually had an Office of Inspector General audit of the Department of Labor, which found that the Department of Labor is not meeting its mandate to protect the right to unionize. And anyone can go and read that report. It's pretty damning. I will say that the previous administration was working to initiate a lot of the recommendations in there, including basically putting a team together that is solely going after non-complying corporations and consultants. And the fact of the matter is, we know who all these people are. There are 20,000 unions in the country. We're talking about 150 consultants. This should be really easy for the Department of Labor to bring the hammer down and say, you guys need to get these disclosures in ASAP, because workers are entitled to know who the hell you are. And I'll give you another example. A lot of times these union busting consultants come in, refuse to actually give their name. We have numerous examples of that. Say, that's not important. You don't need to know who I am. Or they pretend, or at least insinuate, that they are from the NLRB itself and they are there to answer their questions about the election process. That is horrifying. And the problem is, if these disclosures come in after the fact, workers are going to cast their ballots without the information that Congress said that they are entitled to. Obviously, I don't think that there should be any employer interference in union elections, but this is the bare minimum of holding corporations and their union busting consultants accountable during union elections. And it makes a huge impact, guys. I love talking about UAW in Chattanooga. Chattanooga is my second home, and what happened there is incredible. And they kept organizing and organizing until basically VW said, okay, we're not going to, bring in these union busting consultants. But almost at the same time, and they won their election, right? And then almost at the same time, you have Mercedes in Alabama, where they hired an army of union busting consultants, and the result was different. We see this statistically. It makes a huge difference if workers are harassed in the workplace, forced into captive audience meetings, forced into one-on-ones, followed around the workplace while they're doing their job, surveilled. I mean, surveillance is a huge issue. So the bare minimum is that workers deserve to know who the hell these people are.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yes, that is so important. And having that anecdote is something that I'm going to try to commit to memory, because that is just crazy. And it's true that it's good that unions have this level of transparency. I mean, Steve in the chat said so many people don't realize you can look up your union's filings and find out exactly where every penny goes. And I've done that, right? And you can do that, and that's good. And that's good, right? And so why? And obviously, the employer generally does not have these same kinds of responsibilities, but they do have a similar level of responsibility when it comes to the union busters. And 80 to 90% of unions, you said, are like initially in compliance, and virtually 100% get into compliance, whereas employers, only 18% are compliant with these regulations. That is absolutely ridiculous. And I do think it's important that people have this information, because if you realize that this fellow in front of you is getting paid $400 an hour to tell you that unions are bad, well, that might color how you receive that information. And so, that is really important work that you're doing. And Adam, I didn't prep you for this one, so maybe I don't know if you have one off the top of your head, but Adam was like, we should ask him what's the craziest thing that he's uncovered while he's been doing this. So I'm interested in, like, do you have like the craziest thing that you've uncovered since you've been doing LaborLab?
I mean, there's so many. Crazy is probably not the right word. Horrifying might be the right word. And there are so many examples of this. I think here's one of, because it ended well and the nurses won their election. But we were helping with a campaign where they had hired a union busting consultant to come in. and we're forcing captive audience meetings. We did put out a report to the media that this guy hadn't actually made a disclosure, which, if just a quick aside, that is hugely helpful since these guys don't actually comply with the law. If you think you have a persuader in the workplace, please reach out to us because we are basically doing the work that the Department of Labor should be doing. That is the central goal of our nonprofit. But back to your point. So we were working on a campaign with some nurses. They were having union busting was going crazy. A nurse came in one day and was starting her shift and opened the shared drive at the hospital, and right there sitting there was a spreadsheet of entitled like worker analysis, and she opened it and it was a spreadsheet of every nurse in the hospital with personal information and how it could be leveraged against them. So this consultant had sat there and worked with the HR department, potentially the CEO, and went through everyone. And this is the stuff that was in it. One nurse had bad knees, so she, was looking for retirement. So how could that be leveraged against her? Another one had two disabled children, and how could that be leveraged against them, including their personal information, where they lived. It was incredible that they were dumb enough to accidentally save that to the share drive. In fact, the HR director sent out an all hospital email saying, if you saw that, please delete it. Please don't forward it around or anything like that. The nurses printed it out, of course, and put it in everyone's mailbox so that they could see just what their employer thought about them. And that's an example of like the curtain really being pulled back on these folks. But we have, plenty of examples, like an 8-hour captive audience meeting where the guy kept refusing to say what his name was and where he was from. I'm not sure how that captive audience meeting would have been productive, but I mean, these are some of the horrifying stories of the attacks on especially Black and brown communities, and the fear mongering around that is incredibly horrifying and is obviously on the rise as well. But these folks, they will do anything to leverage your personal information, your family and how it's struggling against you, to try to beat the union. So they don't give a damn about you, especially if they've gone to the extent of hiring what is called an anti-union persuader. If they've gone to that far, they do not give a damn. They just want to keep you down. And I mean, that spreadsheet, it blew up in their face, which is what's so powerful when we're able to come in, help them, and really expose where their priorities are. If you're willing to spend more money on one person in an hour than you are 8 people in a day, that says a lot about how much you actually care about a relationship with your employees.
You mentioned that during the last administration, you were trying to do a lot to bring attention to this issue. Obviously, we have a new administration now, but I'm always told that the Department of Labor secretary is awesome and that she loves working people and that she's going to be a great champion for unions. And so Trump has appointed somebody to lead the portion of the Department of Labor. So this is not Lori Chavez Dreamer. I don't remember her name, but Trump has appointed somebody else to oversee the portion of the Department of Labor that oversees these operations that does not seem very union friendly. So I'm just very flummoxed at this whole situation because I've been told that Lori Chavez Dreamer is great and she's going to lead the Department of Labor in great ways. And so I'm just totally bamboozled by what's going on here. But can you help me understand a little bit more? Tell us a little bit more about the person who's going to be leading the OLMS within the department. And do you have confidence that Chavez Dreamer is going to be making her aggressively pursue compliance with these laws?
So a number of things to unpack there, obviously. I think the first is, the previous administration really was taking this issue seriously, which is literally the first time that corporate transparency and union buster transparency has been taken seriously since the LMRDA was passed. Obviously not enough progress made. I mean, I think the high watermark for compliance was 35%, something like that. Don't hold me to it, but well below 50. And the reason I bring that up is we And I think the entire labor movement does not put its eggs in the basket of Congress or agencies. It's really our solidarity together, which is why we do a lot of work, specifically with organizing campaigns where union busters aren't complying with the law, but we have gathered enough information on them that we can fill the void that the Department of Labor has surrendered at this point. To your larger point about the state of the Department of Labor, I mean, we're very alarmed with all of the layoffs that are happening there. We are watching all of this very, very closely. It doesn't seem like this administration, and it's clear that they don't actually care about working people. I will say that our main priority is to see which political hacks are brought into the Department of Labor over time, because they're the ones that can initiate stuff to go after unions. And so this new director of OLMS is Elizabeth Messenger. She's the former CEO of Americans for Fair Treatment. They were trying to be cute and have the same name as AFT, the American Federation of Teachers. So be sure to always call them AFFT. And this organization, Americans for Fair Treatment, was set up. Basically, sole purpose was to take advantage of the Janus decision and harass teachers into opting out of the union. And as someone that used to work for a union that was 50% teachers, I can tell you how these people operate. It's pretty horrifying. For example, school districts get public records requests. Give us the names of all the teachers in your district and where they live so that we can go knock on their door, call them, send them texts, and harass them into dropping their union membership. Probably the most famous institution for this is the Freedom Foundation, but the Elizabeth Messenger's organizations, Americans for Fair Treatment, heavily funded by the State Policy Network and tied to ALEC, purely set up to try to weaken working people's power, specifically in the public sector. So this is concerning, obviously, because we already know that unions are good with complying with the law, but we do think that this signals that the Office of Labor Management is going to be going after unions, especially when it comes to creating administrative headaches with audits and things like that. Listen, we're going to continue to create public pressure on this and say that you need to do your job. We are worried that we're going to go back to where we were during the first Trump administration, where compliance with corporations and consultants basically cratered. We haven't quite seen that yet, so we're going to be keeping an eye on it. And honestly, Jacob, like if they're smart and they want to say, "Hey, we're really on the side of workers," then they would be implementing the Inspector General's report more aggressively than the Biden administration is. They're not going to do that. I don't think so. I mean, I would be shocked. But I think to the larger point is we are not expecting to have a lot of friends in this administration. We're not expecting to have a partnership like we did in the past. And that is why our independent work is so important. As you all know, nothing is given to working people. Nothing is handed to the working class. We've organized before an NLRA. We can organize without one. Hopefully that's not the case. But I hope you understand my point that we are going to continue to call out the administration and the Department of Labor, just like we did under Biden, for not doing its job. But at least then we had partners. This time, our independent work is so much more important, and why we set this organization up, because administrations change and the labor movement cannot depend on tracking and holding union busters accountable just because of who's at the Department of Labor.
Bob Funk, Executive Director of LaborLab, a employer watchdog organization. Really appreciate your time. Appreciate your work. Thank you for your organization's support of the Valley Labor Report. Look forward to continuing our partnership into the rest of this year and beyond, hopefully, and letting more folks know about the important work that y'all are doing over there. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for all you're doing, especially in the South. You guys rock.
Appreciate it. All right. Again, that was Bob Funk, LaborLab. You can find more information about them at laborlab.us. And if you are in a workplace and you feel like, hey, this guy is, I don't recognize him. I don't remember seeing him out and about. Maybe, yeah, those are some. That's a fancy Rolex for a frontline supervisor here at Mercedes. Reach out to LaborLab, let them know, and maybe they can do some digging for you. It's really cool, some of the information that they have about these folks. So really appreciate his time. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.
Which side